I kind of realized how powerful Tupac and I was. You know what I'm saying? Because we two individual people, we waged a coastal beef.
Those were Biggie's haunting last thoughts about the hip-hop war that tore everything apart. But what he never could have imagined was that decades later, a secret tape recorder would catch a confession that finally exposed who really pulled the trigger that night in Vegas, the night that flipped the entire game upside down.
All the stuff that you said on tape, and I've listened to all the tapes, you said that not one person went to jail behind it.
Exactly.
You also said that you saved a lot of motherfuckers from going to jail for extremely long sentences with your cooperation.
September 7th, 1996, Las Vegas turned into the epicenter of chaos. Tupac Shakur had just watched Mike Tyson destroy Bruce Seldon in the first round at the MGM Grand, and the whole place was buzzing like live wires. The night was young, the lights were blinding, and Death Row Records was sitting on top of the world, untouchable, unstoppable, and louder than ever. But then came the moment that would change everything. In the lobby of the casino, Tupac spotted Orlando Anderson, a name that carried weight in the streets, a member of the Southside Crips. Earlier that year, Anderson and his crew had allegedly robbed one of Death Row's people, snatching a Death Row medallion like it was a trophy. This wasn't just about a chain, it was about pride, territory, and the raw code of respect that ruled both the music industry and the streets that kept it alive.
Anderson is absolutely, positively the murderer of Tupac Shakur. Sean Combs was associated back in New York with a high-level drug dealer named Eric Martin. He was known as Zip. Well, Zip was getting his cocaine and his PCP from a West Coast gang member who was a Crip named Keefe D. Keefe D's nephew is Orlando.
Tupac, rolling deep with Suge Knight and the Death Row Squad, charged straight at Anderson. The scuffle exploded in seconds, caught on grainy security footage that showed nothing but fists flying and pure rage. That footage would later become the key piece of evidence in a mystery that haunted hip-hop for decades. Most people don't realize that what went down in that casino wasn't just some random street brawl. It was the explosion of tension that had been building for months between West Coast crews and Crip sets. The mall robbery wasn't just a simple snatch and grab. It was a straight-up challenge. And in that world, when someone calls you out like that, silence isn't an option. You answer fast and you answer loud. The fight itself barely lasted a minute, but the shockwaves from those 60 seconds would echo through hip-hop history for decades. Detective Greg Kading, who later headed the LAPD task force digging into both Tupac and Biggie murders, didn't mince words about what came next. He made it clear that this moment was the spark that set off everything that followed. That connection was deeper than anyone imagined. Behind the headlines, a web of alliances linked East Coast power players to West Coast street operations. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about money, drugs, and loyalty that crossed coastlines and blurred every line between business and the streets. Eric Zip Martin became the middleman, tying Bad Boy Records to the Southside Crips, while Keefe D held down the West Coast end of the operation.
They offered me a deal, yeah, that deal. And I didn't know they was gonna have a tape recording, and they said there was no tape recording.
Right, well, I interviewed Greg Kading about it. He said that he had a hit.
Keeping the pipeline moving. After the brawl inside the MGM, Tupac and Suge decided to keep the night going, heading to Club 662, a flashy spot Suge owned himself. They rolled out in a sleek black BMW 750i, Suge driving with Tupac riding shotgun, the music blasting, and the city lights flashing past. But at around 11:15 p.m., as they stopped at a red light on Flamingo Road near Culver Lane, a white Cadillac eased up beside them. And in that instant, everything was about to change. Inside that white Cadillac sat four men: Keefe D, Orlando Anderson, Terrence Brown, and DeAndre Smith. What went down next has fueled endless documentaries, interviews, and street whispers for decades. But the most chilling account came straight from someone inside that very car, Keefe D himself. In his 2009 Prophet session with Detective Kading, he broke down exactly how the night turned deadly. According to his own words, the silence shattered in seconds. Gunfire erupted, and Tupac was hit 4 times. 2 bullets tore into his chest, one ripped through his arm, and another struck his thigh. One of those chest wounds was devastating, tearing through vital organs and causing massive internal bleeding that no one could have survived without a miracle. Even after being grazed by flying fragments, Suge didn't stop. With blood on his face and chaos all around, he slammed the BMW into a U-turn, racing through the Vegas Strip towards University Medical Center at full speed. Tupac was still conscious at first, trying to fight through the pain, but as the hours passed, his condition spiraled. For 6 long days, he battled for his life, enduring multiple surgeries, including the removal of his right lung. The whole world held its breath, praying he'd make it, but deep down, everyone knew the war had already taken its greatest soldier.
Do you see a gun?
No, once he got the reaching, I got the ducking.
So someone from your car
That's what happened.
started shooting at Tupac.
Doctors had to place Tupac in a medically induced coma, hoping his body could somehow recover from the brutal damage. But on September 13, 1996, at exactly 4:03 p.m., Tupac Amaru Shakur was pronounced dead, only 25 years old. The world froze in disbelief, and the streets of both coasts went silent, mourning a legend whose voice was cut short way too soon. From the very beginning, the investigation was tangled in chaos. Witnesses refused to talk, terrified of payback from powerful gangs or even figures tied to the music industry. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police was stuck in a maze of silence, loyalty, and fear, trying to separate street politics from entertainment power plays. Early investigations stalled almost immediately, with whispers spreading that some LAPD officers might have even been taking money from Death Row Records, a claim that only deepened the mystery. Then came the twist that changed everything, the confession. Keith D didn't step forward out of guilt or some moral awakening. His words came through a profit deal, a legal move that gave him immunity in exchange for spilling details about drug operations tied to both coasts. But here's the wild part. He didn't know every word was being secretly recorded. That hidden tape recorder captured every shocking admission, raw, unfiltered, and real. Keith D thought it was just a private talk, something off the record. Instead, that audio became a time bomb, sitting quietly for years until investigators finally used it as proof. Nearly 30 decades after that tragic Vegas night in September 2023, those same words came back to haunt him, leading to his arrest and closing a chapter hip-hop had been chasing for almost 30 years. Eventually, Keith D's story crumbled under the weight of his own words. After putting out a tell-all memoir and jumping on podcast after podcast, openly talking about his part in the murder, prosecutors finally made their move. They decided that by spilling so much publicly, he had broken the terms of his original deal. His own honesty became the very weapon used against him. The same stories he thought would cement his place in hip-hop history turned into the evidence that sealed his fate. But this is where things get explosive. Across every version of his confession, Keith D never backed down from one shocking claim. He swears the hit on Tupac wasn't just about gang revenge or street pride. According to him, Sean Puffy Combs allegedly put out a $1 million bounty on both Tupac and Suge Knight. Now, Combs is strongly denied ever having any part in such a thing, and to this day, no charges have ever been filed against him related to the murder. Still, that accusation refuses to die because it sits right in the middle of one of hip-hop's darkest rivalries, the East Coast versus West Coast War. By 1996, the feud between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Entertainment had spiraled way beyond lyrical shots. It had turned deadly serious. The tension had been building for years, and everyone could feel the danger creeping closer. When Suge Knight took the stage at the Source Awards and publicly called out Puff Daddy, he drew a line in the sand for the whole world to see. Then Tupac dropped Hit 'Em Up, one of the most savage diss tracks ever, turning the beef personal, naming names, throwing threats, and making it clear there was no going back. The deepest irony came later, when Suge Knight himself looked back and spoke about Tupac's real feelings toward Big G, feelings that according to him weren't fun of hate, but something far more complicated. The very rivalry that the world saw as a battle between enemies might have been fueled by misunderstandings, pride, and the chaos of two giants caught in a storm bigger than both of them. This revelation flips the entire story on its head. It wasn't just about two rappers eaten alive by hate. Tupac's anger toward Big G came from something way deeper, a belief that Big G knew about the Quad Studios setup before it went down. Back in November 1994, Tupac was ambushed inside that Manhattan studio, shot 5 times, and robbed of $40,000 worth of jewelry. That night changed everything. Whether Big G actually had prior knowledge of the attack has always been up for debate, but in Tupac's mind, the damage was already done. What had once been brotherhood turned into betrayal, and from that moment, every lyric, every interview, every move carried that tension. The Quiet Studio shooting became one of hip-hop's biggest unsolved mysteries, an event that twisted loyalty into suspicion and friendship into a ticking bomb. Tupac survived, but he was never the same again. After serving time and being bailed out of prison in 1995 by Suge Knight for $1.4 million, he came out a changed man, with a new label, a new squad, and a brand new fire burning inside him. Death Row became his fortress, and anyone seen as the enemy, especially Big G, was now part of the storm Tupac was ready to unleash.
Pac and Biggie loved each other. When I was in the hotel, Pac in the hotel, and he talking to Biggie before Pac passed away, he wasn't mad at Biggie like, I hate this motherfucker. He was more hurt because he felt that Biggie had something to do with the shooting the studio in New York. And they was talking, I could tell it was two men that cared about each other.
During the Death Row era, Tupac was a completely different beast, harder, louder, and way more ruthless in his approach. His music turned into pure fire, dripping with anger and paranoia, calling out anyone he saw as a threat. Every verse felt like a warning shot, and every track carried the shadow of payback. But the cycle of revenge didn't end with him. 6 months later, hip-hop suffered another devastating blow. On March 9, 1997, Christopher Wallace, known across the world as the Notorious B.I.G, hit the town for the Soul Train Music Awards, followed by an after-party at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. The night was smooth, the vibe was high, and nobody saw what was coming next. At about 12:30 a.m., as Biggie sat in the passenger seat of a Chevrolet Suburban, a dark-colored Chevy Impala crept up beside him. In an instant, gunfire shattered the night. 4 bullets struck Biggie, ending the life of one of rap's greatest voices right there in the car. By 1:15 a.m. at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, he was pronounced dead, just 24 years old. The music world was in shock all over again. The timing, the city, and the eerie similarities to Tupac's murder sent everyone into a frenzy. Was this revenge for Vegas? Did the streets strike back? Biggie had been warned not to come to L.A. Friends told him the city was still too tense, too dangerous, but he came anyway, hoping to show unity through his presence. It was a move that would cost him his life. Meanwhile, Suge Knight was behind bars when the murder happened, and even he later spoke about how wild the timing felt. His comments pointed out how unpredictable things had become, but also helped set up his alibi, a key detail in the never-ending theories claiming he somehow orchestrated Biggie's murder from prison. What came next only deepened the mystery. The investigation into Biggie's murder spiraled into chaos. Accusations of LAPD corruption, ties to Death Row Records, and talk of massive cover-ups. Detective Russell Poole, the lead investigator at the time, became convinced that rogue LAPD officers secretly working with Death Row Records had a hand in the killing. It was a theory that shook law enforcement, the music industry, and the public's trust, showing just how deep and dark this web of violence had become. Detective Russell Poole's shocking theory locked in on one man, David Mack, an LAPD officer with a dark past and dangerous connections. Mack was later convicted of a bank robbery, but before that, he was known to have ties to the Bloods, a connection that raised every red flag imaginable. Poole believed Mack played a major role in setting up Biggie's murder, allegedly acting on behalf of Suge Knight. That explosive theory kicked off years of legal battles between Biggie's family and the city of Los Angeles. Though the lawsuit was eventually dismissed, the burning questions Poole left behind never truly went away. Meanwhile, Detective Greg Kading approached the mystery from a completely different angle. Instead of chasing police corruption, he focused on witness statements, the people closest to the chaos. His investigation took a wild turn when he got a crucial tip from Teresa Swan, a woman who had been romantically involved with Suge Knight. In a 2008 Prophet session, she dropped a bombshell. Her testimony directly tied Suge Knight to the orchestration of Biggie's murder. According to Kading's findings, Knight allegedly put up between $13,000 and $25,000 to pay Wardell Poochie Faust, a well-known mob Piru Blood and close death row affiliate, to carry out the hit. Poochie's reputation on the streets was no joke. He was feared and loyal to the death row circle. But in 2003, his story ended violently too. He was gunned down while riding his motorcycle in Compton. Some investigators believe that hit wasn't random at all, but a cleanup move meant to silence someone who knew too much about Biggie's murder. The problem with both investigations? It always came down to the same wall: what cops believed versus what they could prove. Confessions like Swan's or Keefe's gathered under profit deals were powerful clues for investigators, but nearly impossible to use in court. The truth seemed so close, but every time justice got near, it slipped right back into the shadows. Most of the witnesses who could back up the crucial details are either gone, too scared to talk, or seen as unreliable because of their own criminal pasts. The code of the streets runs deep: silence over justice, loyalty over truth, even when that silence shields the very people who pulled the trigger. It's a code that keeps graves full and answers buried. What makes it all even more heartbreaking is what those closest to Tupac and Biggie have said over the years, that the entire rivalry might have been manufactured, built up and twisted by outsiders who saw profit in chaos. The beef that cost two legends their lives might have been pushed and amplified by people far beyond their control, people who cashed in while the artists took the fall. In his final interview, Biggie showed a deep awareness of this whole game. He didn't sound like a man blinded by hate. He sounded like someone who got it. He knew that he and Tupac had become symbols, avatars for regional pride and fan loyalty. Their personal tension had been turned into a national feud, fueled by the media, hyped by the industry, and used by everyone who stood to gain from keeping the fire burning.
Killed by an associate of Suge Knight's, he hired a guy named Poochie to track down Biggie at the Peterson Auto Museum in March of 1997 and wait for him outside, and he pulled alongside and shot into the side of the car and killing him.
The East Coast-West Coast rivalry didn't just divide hip-hop, it fed the machine. It grabbed headlines, sold millions of records, and built a storyline that the press couldn't stop chasing. The media didn't just report on the beef, they amplified it. Magazines like The Source and Vibe printed every rumor, every diss, every side comment like it was gospel. Radio stations even joined the war, banning artists from opposite coasts and turning music into a battlefield. The tension became a self-fueling fire. Every new track, every incident, every interview only pushed things further. By the time the violence finally broke out, the whole culture had been primed for it. Fans expected drama, labels capitalized on it, and the streets were ready to respond. It was a perfect storm that the media helped create, even if they didn't mean to. But what Keefe D's immunity deal later uncovered flipped that entire story. This wasn't just about rap beef or egos, it was about gang politics. The Southside Crips weren't chasing fame or chart positions, they were seeking revenge. Their target, Tupac, had humiliated Orlando Anderson during that casino beatdown, and in the world they lived in, that kind of disrespect demanded payback, fast and public. The rumored connection to certain bad boy affiliates only made things messier. According to investigators, money from the East Coast entertainment world allegedly funneled into the hands of West Coast gang members, each with their own motives for seeing death row weakened. It wasn't personal, it was business, wrapped in blood. And if Greg Kading's findings are right, the same cold logic drove Biggie's murder too. Suge Knight, devastated by Tupac's death and staring down the collapse of his empire, allegedly turned to Blood's associates to even the score. The violence wasn't about lyrics anymore. It was about money, control, and survival. In the twisted economy of that era, revenge had become its own kind of business plan, and hip-hop was paying the highest price.
And he was bragging about it. And then after Tupac actually died, 6-7 days later, and he kind of shut his mouth after that, but he was bragging about it at first to some of his...
The back and forth between Keith D and interviewers over the years exposed the bizarre fallout of his own confessions. For a long time, his words sat in a strange legal gray area, too important to ignore, but not strong enough to use in court. Detectives valued his insider knowledge, especially when it came to drug trafficking operations, and that information actually helped convict others and shave time off sentences for people caught up in the same world. But when the murder itself came up, everything stayed locked in limbo. No one was officially charged, and justice stayed out of reach. That changed the moment Keith D started running his mouth publicly, bragging about his role, dropping details in interviews, and turning his confession into a content instead of a serious criminal admission. But in doing so, he cracked open the door prosecutors had been waiting on for years. Then came the historic twist. On September 29, 2023, Dwayne Keith D. Davis was finally arrested, a headline that sent shockwaves through hip-hop and beyond. After nearly 30 years of rumors, documentaries, and dead ends, someone was finally facing charges for Tupac's murder. The indictment named Keith D. as the man responsible, charging him with murder with a deadly weapon, making him the first ever person formally prosecuted in one of music's most notorious unsolved cases. The timing raised one big question: why now, after all these years? The answer was hiding in plain sight. Keith D did it to himself. His 2019 memoir, his podcast cameos, his interviews, every single time he went public, he stripped away the protection his immunity deal once gave him. His own voice, his own words became the final piece prosecutors needed. The man who once thought he was untouchable had talked himself straight into handcuffs. Prosecutors came out swinging, arguing that by monetizing his confession, turning it into books, interviews, and podcasts, Keith D had crossed the line. They said he wasn't some cooperating witness anymore, but a man cashing in on his connection to a homicide. What once looked like cooperation now looked like exploitation, and that shift gave them the legal leverage they needed to move forward. But this case hasn't been smooth sailing. The court process has been dragged out by delays, complications, and mountains of evidence. The trial, which was first set for late 2024, has now been pushed all the way to August 2026. Keith D's defense team has been fighting tooth and nail, trying to block the use of his own words in court. They argue that anything he said under immunity shouldn't be used against him now. But prosecutors fired right back, saying that his public interviews and memoir aren't protected by any deal. Those were his own independent confessions, made on his own terms, and that makes them fair game. Still, beneath all the legal talk lies a much heavier question. Can justice really be served after nearly 30 decades? Keith D is now 63 years old, and the man most investigators believe actually fired the gun, Orlando Anderson, has been gone since 1998, shot dead in a gang-related hit in Compton. So what does justice even look like now? For some, this trial is long overdue closure. For others, it's just another reminder that in the world of hip-hop and the streets that surrounded it, the truth has always come at a cost, and sometimes it shows up way too late.
That big murderer, do you believe he came to LA too soon after Tupac got killed?
I don't know the temperature, but I can give my opinion. And the reason why I say I don't know the temperature because I was already in the county.
Orlando Anderson was never charged, never tried, and never convicted. His name forever caught in the middle of hip-hop's most haunted mystery. And if Keith D's claims about Sean Puffy Combs are to be believed, then the alleged mastermind behind the hit has also never faced any kind of legal consequence. What investigators have managed to piece together suggests that right after the Vegas shooting, Anderson couldn't keep quiet. He was out there bragging about it. According to witness Bobby Ladd, and later backed up by other sources, Anderson treated the incident like some kind of twisted victory. He saw it as a street trophy, something to boast about in front of the crew. But everything changed when Tupac actually died days later. That turned the crime from an assault into a murder. And with that came real heat, real consequences, and real fear. The bragging stopped, the whispers started, and silence became the only safe move. Even decades later, the conspiracy theories around both murders refused to fade. Some people still swear that Tupac faked his death and escaped to Cuba, maybe even reconnecting with his aunt Assata Shakur, the Black Liberation Army member who famously broke out of prison and found asylum there. Others insisted Biggie didn't die either, that he's somewhere off the grid, watching the world turn his story into a legend. And then there are the wildest claims of all. The one saying the entire East Coast-West Coast war wasn't just about music or ego at all, but a setup. Some believe powerful agencies had their hands in the chaos, trying to weaken hip-hop's growing influence and silence voices that had started to challenge the system. Whether any of that's true or not, one thing is undeniable. The deaths of Tupac and Biggie went beyond tragedy. They became mythology. Their names stopped belonging just to music. They became symbols of power, pain, and the price of greatness in a world that couldn't handle either of them alive. Tupac's image as a revolutionary, a man who spoke truth to power and lived with fearless conviction, makes it easy to see why so many people can't accept that he's really gone. To his fans, the idea of Tupac faking his death isn't just wishful thinking. It's a way to keep his message alive. He wasn't just a rapper. He was a voice for struggle, for resistance, for change. For many, the thought that someone like that could be silenced forever feels impossible. And then there's Big E, hip-hop's master storyteller. His lyrics painted the streets with brutal honesty and unmatched skill. He could turn pain into poetry, fear into rhythm. Losing him felt like losing the heartbeat of the East Coast. For fans, it's no wonder that even the finality of his death feels hard to accept. Big E's voice was too sharp, too powerful, too timeless to ever really fade away. The shock of losing both icons just 6 months apart sent the entire hip-hop world into mourning and reflection. The grief turned into a cultural reckoning. Movements like Stop the Violence suddenly took on new urgency, and rappers began to rethink how far the beef in their lyrics should really go. What had once been bragged about in songs now had names, faces, and graves attached to it. The streets had always been dangerous, but now the danger hit home. For Suge Knight, the aftermath was pure destruction. Death Row Records, the label that once ruled the West Coast like a kingdom, crumbled under lawsuits, chaos, and the loss of its biggest star. And Suge himself couldn't outrun the fallout. In 2015, he ran over Terry Carter outside a Compton restaurant, a moment that sealed his fate. He was convicted of vehicular manslaughter and is now serving a 28-year sentence, his empire reduced to nothing but memories and warning stories. Meanwhile, Bad Boy Entertainment took a completely different path. Puffy Combs managed to pivot, expanding beyond music into fashion, television, and global business. While Death Row collapsed, Bad Boy evolved, proving that in the ruthless game of hip-hop power, survival often depends on how fast you can reinvent yourself. Even after all these years, the rumors linking Puffy Combs to Tupac's murder haven't completely faded. Recent civil suits have brought his name back into the spotlight, though no criminal charges have ever been filed. Still, the legacies of Tupac and Big E go beyond the violence that took them. Tupac's music keeps reaching new generations. His posthumous albums, poetry, and activism still spark inspiration worldwide. With over 75 million records sold and an induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he remains one of music's most powerful voices, an artist who dared to challenge injustice and speak truth without fear. Biggie's impact runs just as deep. His posthumous album Life After Death went diamond, shaping the entire mafioso rap era and setting a lyrical bar that rappers still chase today. His storytelling, his flow, and his wordplay turned hip-hop into art with cinematic precision. As Suge Knight once reflected on Death Row's creation, both Tupac and Biggie were born from a unique mix of culture, ambition, and industry pressure, a world that elevated them to greatness, even as it pulled them to tragedy. The way the industry marketed Tupac and Biggie as rivals locked in an unstoppable feud played a massive role in how everything spiraled out of control. Those strategies didn't just sell records, they helped write a tragedy. Now, as the Keith D trial approaches in 2026, the last chapter of this decades-long story still hangs in the air. Will a conviction finally give Tupac's family and fans the closure they've been waiting for? Could new evidence surface, pulling even more names into the mix? And will Biggie's murder ever get the same kind of legal resolution? These unanswered questions keep the world watching, even 30 years later. What we do know is that the deaths of Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G. were much more than personal losses. They marked a turning point in hip-hop history. Their murders forced the entire culture to face a painful truth. The violence that had been glorified in lyrics suddenly had real, irreversible consequences. The line between performance and reality disappeared, and what was left was raw pain and reflection. Their feud was both real and manufactured, rooted in genuine street tensions, but magnified by the media, record labels, and an industry that saw profit in chaos. And yet, their deaths froze them in time, immortal, untouchable, and forever young. The world didn't just lose two rappers, it gained two legends whose influence has never faded. And at the center of it all sits Keith D's taped confession, the moment he didn't even know he was being recorded. That hidden tape stands as both a revelation and a reminder. A revelation because it finally names the players in a mystery that haunted music for decades, and a reminder because it shows how the same system that built these icons also helped destroy them, turning the dream of hip-hop into one of the most tragic sagas in music history. It is also a reminder because it shows that justice, even when delayed, never arrives untouched. By the time it shows up, it's changed, its meaning reshaped by time, loss, and the silence of those who can no longer speak. For fans who grew up on Tupac and Biggie, who felt their words, lived their lyrics, and found truth in their pain, these legal battles offer something close to closure, but it's a hollow kind of peace. The men who pulled the triggers are either gone or growing old, and the music industry that once fueled their rivalry has transformed into something entirely new. What remains are the records, the interviews, and the footage, snapshots of two legends forever frozen at their peak. They'll always be young, always unfinished, always echoing through time, reminding us not just of what they gave, but of what was lost. Their legacy isn't just history, it's living memory, still pulsing through every beat and every bar that came after. If you felt this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell so you never miss a drop, and keep the legacy of Tupac and Biggie alive with every view, every comment, and every conversation that keeps their voices echoing through hip-hop forever.